So I wanted to give an example from inside a government program and how some decisions are made in terms of what we do and don't do within programs. And as Marianne explained, I'm a senior orphans and vulnerable children technical advisor at one of the PEPFAR agencies, specifically USAID. And I've been with USAID now for, about 7 years. And during that time, I've also gotten a very interesting inside view of how things work. It's always a mystery when you're on the outside. But before I talk about how we make decisions, I just wanted to point out the critical importance of input on programs for children at this point. If you look at our success and our results in the pandemic, unfortunately, we haven't seen proportionate results for children, and I'll give you a few examples of that. Currently, children under 15, only about a third of them have access to treatment, which is about half of adults and a third of all children who need treatment. We know also that adolescents are the only group for whom HIV-related deaths are increasing. Very troubling statistics. And finally, I think it's important to point out that despite the wonderful expansions in treatment, that we still have issues in terms of children losing one or both parents and other family members. So currently, at this time, there are more than 18 million children in the world who have lost one or both parents. And while I think that treatment coverage is going to make a difference in that and decline rates over time, we're still dealing with children who were, say, 3, 4 years old 10 years ago, who are 13, 14 now, before treatment expanded to the point that it is now. So we've got a lot of kids entering their adolescence without a parent. And as you know, being an orphan is something that it's irreversible, it's lifelong. And so again, I just think that any decisions that we make about children's programs with limited resources really have to be spot on. So with that, I should point out that PEPFAR, because of the work of many different child advocates, community advocates globally, but very much in the United States, has actually within the legislation a budgetary requirement that 10% of all funds are spent on orphans and vulnerable children. It also has, again, through the work of many different community advocates, a budgetary requirement of 50% or more to be spent on care and treatment for both children and adults. And so we're talking about a substantial, I think, attention and support for children and their families within the PEPFAR program. So overall, in a government program, and speaking specifically of the United States here, the legislation is really the guidance at a macro level for how we can expend funds in countries around the world. And the legislation really points out where we need to go and what results we need to get when we get there. But legislation is only so long and so specific, so we also have strategies like the Blueprint for an AIDS-free generation. And below that, what I think people aren't as aware of is that most of the technical areas, the key technical areas within the PEPFAR program, have technical working groups that also provide very specific program guidance, and that's what I'm going to talk about here today. So the program guidance for PEPFAR for my area, orphans and vulnerable children, first came out in 2006, and at the time I was on the civil society side, and I was a bit miffed that when the guidance came out, that it had really been very much created internally by government agencies with not a lot of civil society input. And so I was determined when I got to the other side, when I was in government, that we would find many ways and opportunities for civil society and other stakeholders to input. So I wanted to say that when we do guidance, it's usually a long and iterative and tortuous process, as Don pointed out. And we have to take many different things into consideration. One are the different stakeholder groups, and in this case, it's obviously very much children's and women's groups. Secondly, obviously the evidence base is key. And finally, though it's not mentioned as a voice for civil society, I think it's actually a very important voice for communities on the ground, and those are external evaluations and reviews where people have the opportunity to go out and interview the different grassroots organizations and beneficiaries of the programs and find out from them what they think is important to change or reshape the program. So in terms of stakeholder groups, I just wanted to point out a few of them that have been strong champions for children, both that have been present at this conference and had this past weekend special meetings to look at children affected by AIDS. One is the Coalition for Children Affected by AIDS that they've had meetings back since Toronto to coincide with the International AIDS Society meetings, and they've brought together different groups from around the world at all different levels, from community-based groups to researchers to donors, and I think it provides a very rich forum for understanding the landscape. There's also the Global Partners Forum that's convened by UNICEF and UNAIDS and other partners that also held its meeting in this past week. And really, I think one of the joint concerns brought to donors at this meeting was the need for socioeconomic support to really care and protect children and families in the pandemic. So obviously the evidence base is very important to us. And just another plug for a publication that came out during the conference, and that is a special supplement on AIDS that looks specifically at recent evidence for children born into families affected by HIV. And that's actually freely available on the internet. Also at the International AIDS Conference, it really is an opportunity for people like me who try and be everywhere at once but can't be to learn some of the latest and emerging evidence that's happening and may not even be published yet. And I'll give you two examples. One, there was a really, I thought, great session on social drivers to end AIDS, and Lucy Kluver from South Africa presented on that and her work looking at social cash transfers and the importance of psychosocial care together to reduce HIV risk in adolescents. And then also what was, I think for me, one of the most helpful sessions that I attended is recent research in South Africa and Malawi that looks at disability, a range of disabilities faced by children both living with HIV as well as children affected by HIV. So obviously that is, typical from the evidence base and the many different forums such as journals, et cetera, and forums like this that we get a sense of where the literature is taking us, where the evidence is taking us. But I want to mention last something that I think is really keenly important, and that is evaluations and external reviews. When we did our revision of our program guidance, we had an open period where anybody from any civil society group or umbrella group could comment and provide suggested revisions, ideas, discussions on the guidance. And we did that both online, and we also had several in-person consultations, both globally and at country level. The guidance is only as good as hearing from the people who have to live by the guidance. So that was very important. The other thing we did is we put together two external review teams, one that occurred in 2008 and looked at a series of country programs, and another that occurred just before about the year preceding the revision of the guidance. And what was so important about that, of those reviews and those evaluations, is that people who are living in the remotest parts of the world are able to give their thoughts and opinions on how to shape the program. And I included a photograph here of one of the guys in our program. This is Joseph. He's been living with HIV for a number of years now. He's there with his family. And early on in the program, one of the things that I think happened a lot was that we were giving things to families and children, such as school uniforms or school fees. And people like Joseph, who's very involved in his local support group, pointed out that it would be much better if we gave people like him and his wife and others in the community access to ways to expand their income and build micro enterprises, which is shown right here. He's standing with his 2 children. And I think that input like that in terms of what makes a good program or not is always very important to us. So I'll just leave with saying that if you want more information on the PEPFAR program, pepfar.gov, all of the program guidance is there, usa.gov, but also ovcsupport.net, which is accessible worldwide and open for comments on many different subjects, including on how we can continuously improve our program, including the guidance. Thanks.